Hello and welcome to In Pursuit of Clarity episode 20, entitled Race, Racism, and Language Abuse. One of the first videos I created was on the topic of language, which I spoke of as essentially being the main battlefield for the political, ideological, cultural, even spiritual wars currently raging at a fever pitch. I didn't begin to do the topic justice. Nobody could hope to in a single video. It's a topic so immensely important and so sprawling and complicated, and one that's now become so deeply confused and muddled that it'll take immense efforts to unravel the knotted mess. But the good news is I think we're fully capable and up to the task, and I think the process is finally taking its first clumsy steps as we speak. The first step in this process is the recognition of just how powerfully our language has been polluted and subverted. And by this I mean how certain terms have either been invented anew or more often twisted and manipulated from what was formerly clear and concise definitions, and the why behind this assault on clarity. To set the stage for this topic, I'd like to speak to the misconception many still have with regards to these ideological factions currently waging war. Some still think that all of these factions are just taking different paths to make the world a better place in their own way. And although the means and methods might differ, that we're all working for the greater good. It's my opinion that this is a mistake, and a fundamental mistake, one that causes a faulty frame of reference, causing everything viewed through this frame to be poorly understood accordingly. For example, I think we can all agree that there are selfish, bitter, or angry, or otherwise self-serving people in this world. From here, might we also agree that these individuals often seek power and influence, just like anyone else? In fact, perhaps such people are even more ambitious in their desire for power and control, seeing it, especially in our age, as a means of personal enrichment, or ego glorification, or a tool to strike out at those they despise. And if you're with me so far, it's not a big leap to assume, from here, that these individuals might work together to attain their goals. If power is the aim, these ambitious individuals obviously aren't going to be honest about who and what they are and what they seek, of course, but rather take on the most useful mask at every turn, creating a palatable facade that wins them support and donations and votes. So in a democracy with a voting public that's been essentially herded to and fro by a controlled press and popular culture, both ultimately controlled by the same ideological faction, using a virtually endless supply of money and a legal system that's so tilted in their favor as to look absurd to any objective party looking from the outside in. These types of individuals have found it easier and easier with each passing year to sprint upward through the ranks. A politician that sticks to the script will have the controlled press lauding their every move, acting as brand manager and hype man. Our supposed entertainment programs, like The View or Trevor Noah, or Colbert, or Kimmel, or Myers, will find creative ways to praise you and cut down your opponents. Shady organizations will search through your opponent's past for any hint of a scandal. Pollsters will use manipulative push-pulling techniques to make it seem as if you're highly popular and well ahead of your opponents. All of these things help, and disgustingly, they've played the leading role in orienting our political and cultural landscape for decades. But they're not quite enough. The most powerful tool these culture and narrative shaping elements can make use of, and one that has a trickle-down effect of making all others even more powerful, is the wholesale destruction and reinvention of language. The best example of this language perversion is an example I'd cited in my video, one that we're hearing and will hear far more about in the near future. The concept of racism. This is a particularly maddening example. The way this word is now defined in popular usage, one either believes that all races are equal in every regard across the board, and that any difference in behavior or achievement or in any other respect is purely due to oppression and injustice, or one is racist, hateful, and likely wants to see all other races suffer, or be proactively mistreated somehow, or perhaps be exterminated. This is the false dichotomy that's been so masterfully created, this black and white choice. One could even further simplify the choice they're attempting to foist on the world at large to this: are you a decent and loving person, or are you horrible and hateful? Consider for a moment just how powerful this magic is and how effective it's been in practice. Care deeply about the future of your child, for their happiness and safety and health, and the environment they'll one day grow up in? Sorry, there's no checkbox for you. Choose decent and loving, or horrible and hateful. Now, of course, most people are growing uncomfortable with this and recognize it as deceitful and dishonest and the worst type of manipulation. But at the same time, it works, and it has worked, because the majority of the public doesn't take a deep dive into these subjects, but rather treats them superficially. And when subjects like this are approached superficially, the vast majority of people will act in whatever manner they perceive to be in their immediate self-interest. In this case, it's obvious which of the two stances might make life easier and help a person clamber ever higher up that money or power or influence or ego pyramid. Being a stickler for truth here yields no immediate gain in the current environment. In fact, quite the opposite. So most people simply compromise. And the worst among us embrace the false dichotomy with enthusiasm and milk it for everything it's worth. After all, for the past several years, there's been no easier way to gain positive press and adulation of the ignorant more easily. As these types gain in power and influence and help set the broader prevailing cultural tone, the definition of the word continues to degenerate accordingly, and this becomes a vicious cycle. So, as all subtlety and nuance with regards to the word racism is lost, and an ever more tilted and inaccurate playing field is created accordingly, a word or concept representing the feelings and opinions of most of those in the Western world has disappeared and become lost in the shuffle. And I'd like to try to define that third position here, and to do so in the most honest way I'm able by speaking to what I know best, namely my own opinions on this matter. I don't hate racial minorities. So far from it, in fact, that I sincerely wish them the best in all senses of the word. Health, happiness, to live long and fulfilling lives. And if I didn't feel as if my own people and culture and traditions were being destroyed around me, I might even find myself fighting for their betterment in some alternative universe. Now, that's not to say I believe multiculturalism is healthy by any stretch of the imagination, or that their happiness or our own will arise from a situation in which we're forced to live side by side and forced to take on a one-size-fits-all culture, or policies, or goals, or worldviews. Far from it. But I have absolutely no desire to see anyone or any people suffer or be robbed of living up to their fullest potential. I know those of us with eyes wide open are surrounded with videos of migrant attacks, crude and animalistic behavior on our city streets, and subjected to sound bites of the most ignorant and arrogant politicians and influencers seeking to turn anti-white or anti-Western ideology into mainstream opinion. But what I attempt to do in my own life, and what I encourage others to do, is to calm the righteous anger caused by these inputs by focusing on the other side of the coin. Example, there are countless fundamentally decent and hardworking individuals within every race who keep their heads down and struggle mightily in uphill battles to keep their family fed and educated and provide a better life for their children than they experience themselves. I purposefully aim for a balance of these two extremes to keep my own perspective as objective and just as is possible on these issues. Again, and this is vital, this doesn't mean I believe multiculturalism to be viable. It may still be an extreme opinion relative to the present atmosphere, but I certainly don't believe this, and couldn't possibly bring myself to believing this, based on historical context and my own understanding of past and present. And while I may believe different races and cultures have different pronounced strengths and weaknesses, this doesn't inspire hatred, nor would I ever seek to act unjustly or unduly harshly towards them as a whole. It merely means that I refuse to stray from what I see as the obvious truth, in order to mindlessly embrace and parrot delusional talking points that I know to be untrue. In other words, I refuse to be forced to lie to myself and others, to cater to the whims of a world gone mad. And further, I refuse to be called hateful for choosing a path of personal intellectual honesty. It's the furthest thing from hate, and the irony is this: secretly, deep down, virtually everyone prefers this type of honesty. For example, I think many Black Americans are deeply resentful of the walking on eggshells mentality so many on the left have when speaking with or about them. This signals to them, intuitively and on a deep level, that there is dishonesty at play. This person is having to be very careful with the words they choose, meaning they're not speaking in an easy, genuine, heartfelt way, but rather a contrived and scripted way. It's a facade, and it's almost always intuitively sensed to be artificial. Nobody appreciates this, least of all those peoples they're trying to protect by doing so, in their unconsciously pretentious manner. Think of how free and easy conversations are when two parties feel comfortable enough with one another to needle and prod one another with lighthearted insults, even if half-truthful. This type of back and forth is healthy, and it's natural. It can also be informative and correcting and refining with regards to one's behaviors. And one can feel that it's more natural. Personally speaking, I've never had issues speaking to anyone in these respects, with the exception of the hypersensitive and histrionic, precisely because of this honesty. And I like to think that this is in large part because it can be sensed on the other end. This doesn't mean one says every little negative thing they feel, just as they wouldn't do this with any individual or group, unless they were actively seeking conflict. But one speaks enough of their mind in order to prove to the other party that you're dealing with them honestly. Such interactions allow us to understand one another in a more real and genuine way, and simultaneously act as steam release valves of sorts. When individuals on either side of the ideological spectrum are forced to bottle everything up, an explosion is inevitable. This isn't tenable in the long term, and it's not natural, and it's not adult or mature in any sense of these words. Worst of all, it's profoundly dishonest and manipulative and deceptive, and all but ensures mutual misunderstanding and extreme tension. I truly believe most of those in America and Europe are closer to this third position I've outlined than they are to either of the black and white extremes laid out at the outset of this cast. Meaning we seek to be honest in discussions regarding race and culture, because we're adults and this is what adults do. But this doesn't mean we feel a burning hatred or actively seek the worst for others. And the irony is this: I have no doubt the best and healthiest, peaceful outcome for all races can only come about as a result of this honesty, not as a result of this mass deception and delusion so many have embraced, this wholly artificial and contrived approach to race and race relations. In fact, this path of delusion serves to make the more peaceful and orderly solutions all but impossible, and the most extreme racial tension and violence all but inevitable. Ideally, we'd soon coin a term for this middle position, the no man's land between the absurdist race doesn't exist and we're all precisely the same in every respect theory, and the all people not of my lineage must be treated unjustly and cruelly line of thought. But to quote a famous prosecutor, this is beyond my purview with regards to this podcast. At the very least, I wanted to illustrate just how deceptively this word has been bent and shaped to serve a weaponized purpose, and just how far off the mark we've strayed with regards to clarity of thought and communication as a result. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my